Tonight, we gently continue our journey into another quiet corridor of hidden history. A place not always spoken of openly, yet deeply connected to the everyday rhythm of American life. This is not a story of loud streets alone, not only of dimly lit backrooms or whispered meetings. Instead, it is a story of docks, construction sites, union halls, shipping routes, and ordinary workers. People who rose early, worked long hours, lifted steel, loaded cargo, built roads, bridges, cities. And somewhere within those systems, quietly, power gathered. For much of the 20th century, labor unions were among the most important institutions in the United States. They protected workers, negotiated wages, created stability, gave voice to those whose labor shaped the nation. For millions, these unions were essential, a source of security, a path toward better living. And yet, where large systems exist, where money moves steadily, where contracts shape industries, there are always those who recognize opportunity. And so, over time, organized crime, particularly elements of the American Mafia, began to see labor unions not simply as worker organizations, but as gateways. Gateways to influence, to contracts, to transportation, to pension funds, to political relationships. And so, with patience, with strategy, with silence, they moved closer. Not overnight, not through obvious conquest, but gradually, quietly, like water finding its way through stone. In cities such as New York City, Chicago, Detroit, and Philadelphia, industries expanded rapidly. Construction cranes rose, shipping ports grew busier, factories hummed, trucks crossed state lines. And with this expansion, labor itself became increasingly organized. Large unions held tremendous influence, control over who worked, when they worked, how much they earned, and which companies gained access to labor. To organized crime, this was powerful, because influence over labor could mean influence over business itself. Consider the docks, where ships arrived carrying food, materials, goods from around the world. To control dock labor, even partially, meant influence over movement, over timing, over costs, over access. In certain ports, particularly in New York, waterfront unions became areas of deep strategic importance. The loading and unloading of ships, something seemingly ordinary, could quietly become a place where hidden systems operated beneath the visible one. The same was true in construction. As cities expanded upward, with steel skeletons rising into skylines, contracts became enormously valuable. Large public works, roads, bridges, housing projects, commercial towers. Who received those contracts? Who supplied labor? Who avoided delays? These questions carried enormous financial significance. And so, through relationships with union leadership, through quiet alliances, through strategic pressure, organized crime figures could sometimes shape outcomes without public visibility. This influence was not always direct. Often it existed through layers: a trusted intermediary, a local official, a union representative, a contractor, a quiet agreement. And because so much of this occurred within legitimate systems, it often remained difficult to fully detect. To the average worker, life often appeared unchanged. They reported for work, collected pay, attended meetings, supported families, and many had little awareness of larger forces quietly shaping certain decisions above them. Perhaps one of the most discussed examples was the relationship between organized crime and aspects of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. The Teamsters, with enormous influence over trucking and transportation, held significant power. Through trucking routes, goods moved across the nation. Through pension funds, vast pools of capital existed. And where transportation flows, economic influence follows. For certain organized crime groups, relationships within such institutions represented strategic advantage. This did not mean full control, nor did it define all union operations, but historical investigations revealed enough overlap to create lasting public fascination. At times, union pension funds were linked to large development projects. One often cited example involved investments connected to the growth of places like Las Vegas, where entertainment, hospitality, and construction intersected. These were not always simple relationships. They were layered, complex, often hidden beneath legal structures. And this complexity made the system resilient. Because the power did not always come from obvious criminal acts, it often came from influence, from excess, from quiet leverage. And leverage can be extraordinarily powerful. In labor systems, a strike could halt production. A delay could cost millions. An approval could unlock massive profits. A pension decision could finance expansion. Thus, where unions held power, strategic influence over unions could ripple outward into entire sectors of the economy. This is why, for decades, federal investigators, journalists, and reformers paid increasing attention. Not because labor unions themselves were inherently corrupt, but because certain vulnerabilities within powerful institutions could be exploited. Investigations gradually revealed patterns, connections, networks. Some involved bribery, some involved intimidation, some involved long-standing alliances. And yet, as with so much in Mafia history, the system often depended less on overt force and more on predictability, on relationships, on the quiet understanding that certain arrangements benefited specific parties. But history, like all things, moves. And over time, public scrutiny increased. The rise of federal legal tools, including the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, created new pathways for prosecution. This law allowed investigators to examine broader organizational structures rather than isolated actions. And for systems built upon networks, this mattered greatly. Suddenly, patterns could be prosecuted more effectively. Leadership structures could face greater pressure. The hidden architecture became more vulnerable. At the same time, media coverage expanded. Public awareness grew. Internal divisions emerged. Informants, once rare, became more significant. And slowly, the quiet web of influence began to weaken. This did not happen instantly. No single event ended such systems. Rather, it was gradual. Investigations, trials, regulatory reforms, leadership changes, economic evolution. Together, they shifted the balance. Industries modernized, oversight increased, union reforms strengthened transparency. And while corruption did not vanish entirely from any large system, the broad, sustained influence once associated with mafia power over labor declined significantly. Today, this chapter of history remains deeply compelling because it reveals something larger. It shows how power can move, not only through violence, but through institutions, how influence may operate within structures people depend upon daily, how systems built to protect can sometimes be targeted by those seeking leverage. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that history is rarely simple. Labor unions themselves played vital roles in improving workers' lives. They fought for safety, fair wages, reasonable hours, security. At the same time, certain individuals and organizations sometimes sought to manipulate that power for private gain. Both truths can exist together, and understanding that complexity offers a more honest picture of the past. So tonight, as we gently close this chapter, imagine the docks at sunrise, ships resting quietly beside weathered piers, steel beams rising slowly against the skyline, truck engines humming softly on distant highways, workers gathering, coffee in hand, beginning another day. And beneath it all, the memory of hidden systems, once moving silently through the machinery of labor itself. Quiet agreements, invisible influence, power not always seen, but often felt. And now, as those echoes fade, the city softens once more. The cranes stand still, the ports grow quieter, the union halls empty into evening, and history, like the tide, recedes gently, leaving behind lessons not shouted, but whispered. Lessons of power, of labor, of silence, and of the remarkable complexity of the American story. So let your thoughts slow now, as the streets grow calmer, as the lights dim softly, and as the hidden machinery of the past drifts peacefully into the night.